You believe you're working when you're in flow. You've structured your entire operation around entering that state. The deep absorption, the time distortion, the laser focus. You call it productivity. You defend it as optimal performance. But here's the pattern you haven't named. You're filtering every decision through a single corrupted question. Not what does the business need, but what will feel good to do. This is hedonic prioritization. It's the systematic selection of tasks based on the psychological pleasure they trigger in you, rather than the growth they generate for the entity you're building. You've convinced yourself that flow equals progress. It doesn't. Flow is a neurochemical state. Progress is a business outcome. They overlap occasionally, but when you architect your days around one, you sacrifice the other. Every entrepreneur operates within 3 categories of work. First, high-flow activities, the tasks that put you into that absorbed, energized state. For some, it's strategy sessions or product design. For others, it's content creation or developing new offers. These are the activities you could do for hours without checking the clock. Second, low-flow activities, the draining work you avoid, the tasks that create friction and discomfort. This might be operational systems work, recruiting calls, financial planning, or administrative cleanup. Third, the activities your business actually needs to grow. These growth-necessary tasks don't cluster conveniently in your high-flow bucket. They're distributed randomly across both pleasure and pain. But most entrepreneurs default to high-flow work. They build their schedules around what triggers dopamine, not what drives results. This creates a day-to-day experience that feels productive. You're energized, focused, deeply engaged while the business stagnates. You're working hard on the wrong things. The trap isn't laziness. It's the belief that if you're in flow, you must be doing what matters. You're not. You're doing what feels good. And every hour spent there is an hour not spent on the uncomfortable, unengaging work that would actually move the business forward. Consider the founder who spends 3 hours perfecting a presentation deck because design work puts him in flow, while avoiding the 10 recruiting calls that would actually fill his most critical role. Or the entrepreneur who endlessly refines her product features because development feels rewarding, while neglecting the sales conversations that would generate revenue. The work feels important. It looks like progress, but it's strategically misaligned. The business doesn't need a better deck or more features. It needs team capacity and revenue. The gap between what you're doing and what needs to be done is the hedonic gap. And it's widening every day you prioritize feeling productive over being effective. Machiavelli understood a principle that modern entrepreneurs have forgotten. The self is not a unified entity with consistent priorities. It's a battleground between competing systems, one that plans with cold rationality, another that executes with hot impulse. The mature operator doesn't indulge the illusion that these systems align naturally. He constructs mechanisms to force alignment. The leaders you respect, the CEOs running organizations at scale, don't filter their work through flow. They filter it through necessity. They've learned what you're about to learn, that the path to sustained growth requires bifurcating your mind into 2 distinct roles. One role sets the strategy as if someone else will execute it. The other role executes that strategy without negotiation, regardless of how it feels in the moment. When you separate these functions, you eliminate the psychological contamination that occurs when the same mind both plans and performs. I'm not here to make you feel better about your current approach. I'm here to show you how to rebuild your relationship with work so that business growth determines your actions, not your moment-to-moment preferences. This requires understanding the neurochemical architecture that's been controlling you, then implementing a systematic override. What follows is the framework. Framework 1, the dual reward system and the growth decision. Your brain operates 2 separate reward circuits, and you've been optimizing for the wrong one. The first circuit is the dopamine system. Dopamine doesn't create pleasure, it creates wanting. It's the neurochemical that drives you toward activities that promise reward. When you sit down to work and feel pulled toward strategy sessions or creative projects, that's dopamine signaling anticipated satisfaction. But here's what Kent Berridge discovered at the University of Michigan. Liking and wanting are handled by different systems. You can want something intensely while deriving minimal satisfaction from having done it. The second circuit is the serotonin system. Serotonin signals status, security, and resource control. It's the neurochemical released when your business grows, when you see tangible progress in the entity you're building. This is growth-based pleasure. It's deeper, more durable, and significantly more reinforcing than the fleeting hits you get from working on tasks you enjoy. But it requires enduring activities that don't trigger dopamine in the moment. Most entrepreneurs chase dopamine and wonder why they feel unsatisfied despite constant activity. They're confusing the itch of wanting with the satisfaction of achievement. The growth decision is the conscious choice to optimize for serotonin-driven outcomes rather than dopamine-driven activities. This means identifying the single question that determines your schedule. What does the business need to grow? Not, what do I want to work on? Not, what will put me in flow? The business need becomes the filter. Everything else is noise. This sounds obvious. It's not, because the moment you sit down to work, your brain defaults to hot cognition, the emotional, impulse-driven processing mode that prioritizes immediate comfort. You'll feel the pull toward familiar tasks, toward work that feels productive because it feels good. That pull is dopamine. The discipline is recognizing it, naming it, and choosing the serotonin-driven alternative. This isn't willpower. It's architecture. You're not fighting impulse. You're preempting it by deciding in advance. When your mind is calm and rational, what work will be done regardless of how you feel when the time comes. The practical application starts with a simple audit. List every major task you completed last week. Now mark each one as either business necessary or hedonically preferred. Be honest. Did you spend Tuesday afternoon on that task because the business needed it or because it put you in flow? Most entrepreneurs discover that 60–70% of their time goes to hedonically preferred work. That's not a character flaw. It's a predictable outcome of letting dopamine drive your schedule. The correction is to flip that ratio. You want 70% of your time allocated to business necessary work, even when it doesn't feel good. The remaining 30% can be high-flow activities, but only after the growth-critical work is complete. Framework 2. The robotic clone and the third-person strategy. Hugo Grossman, at the University of Waterloo, studied a phenomenon called the Solomon paradox. King Solomon was famous for dispensing profound wisdom to everyone in his kingdom. Yet his personal life was chaotic and poorly managed. Grossman discovered this isn't a character flaw. It's a feature of human cognition. When you think about someone else's problem, you bypass egocentric bias. You see clearly, you reason objectively. You consider multiple perspectives without emotional contamination. But the moment the problem is yours, your thinking narrows. You zoom in. Emotions distort logic. You lose the forest for the trees. Grossman called the solution self-distancing. When you adopt a third-person perspective on your own situation, you dampen the activation of egocentric networks in the brain. You stop assuming you know what's best and start looking objectively at what the situation requires. This is where the robotic clone framework comes in. It's a cognitive tool designed to separate strategy from execution identity. Here's how it operates. When setting your business strategy, pretend you have a robotic clone of yourself. This clone has your skills, your knowledge, your capabilities, but zero emotional preferences. It will execute any task you assign without complaint, without fatigue, without the need for psychological reward. Now ask, if this clone were doing all the work, what would I have it do to maximally grow the business? Be specific. Would you have the clone spend 6 months conducting 1,000 interviews to find the perfect technical co-founder, the way Sam Ovens did when building his platform? Would you have it fly to every industry conference for a year straight, regardless of whether networking feels energizing or draining? Would you have it take on the operational work you've been avoiding because it doesn't align with your zone of genius? Write down those activities. That's your business-first strategy, free from the psychological contamination that occurs when you're planning work you know you'll have to execute. This framework works because it forces cold cognition during the planning phase. You're calm, detached, strategic. You can see what the business needs without the distortion of, but I don't want to do that. Later, when it's time to execute, you're not making a fresh decision about what to work on. You're simply following the strategy set by your rational self. The clone doesn't exist, obviously. But by planning as if it does, you eliminate the hedonic filter that's been sabotaging your growth. The key is writing down the clone's task list in concrete terms. Not improve marketing, but conduct 50 customer interviews to identify the 3 primary objections preventing purchase. Then rewrite the sales page to address those objections specifically. Not hire better, but source 200 candidates through outbound recruiting. Conduct 30 first-round interviews and move 10 to final round evaluations within 60 days. The more specific the task, the less room for hedonic substitution later. Your future self can't replace conduct 50 customer interviews with brainstorm marketing ideas and pretend it's the same thing. Specificity locks in the strategy. Framework 3, cold cognition, hot cognition, and the scheduled override. Your brain doesn't operate in a single mode. It switches between 2 processing systems depending on context. Cold cognition is how you think when you're planning. Calm, rational, able to see long-term consequences clearly. Hot cognition is how you think in the moment when you're about to start work. Emotional, impulse-driven, pulled toward immediate reward and away from immediate discomfort. The entrepreneurs who consistently execute business-critical work don't have superior discipline. They've structured their operations so that cold cognition determines their schedule, not their hot cognition impulses. Here's the mechanism. When you sit down to work and feel a pull toward a task that wasn't on your business-first strategy, you stop. You ask one diagnostic question. Is this what the business needs, or is this what I want to work on? If it's what you want, but not what the business needs, you've just caught hedonic prioritization in real time. That moment of recognition is the intervention point. You don't fight the impulse. You acknowledge it, label it accurately, and redirect to the predetermined task. This works because you're not relying on willpower. Willpower is a hot cognition resource. It depletes under emotional load. Instead, you're following a system set during cold cognition. You've already decided what will be done. The in-the-moment version of you doesn't get a vote. This sounds authoritarian because it is. You're not treating yourself as a unified agent with consistent priorities. You're treating yourself as Machiavelli would, as a collection of competing drives that must be managed strategically. The practical implementation requires ruthless scheduling. You don't keep your business-first strategy as a vague intention. You block specific hours for specific tasks, and those blocks are non-negotiable. If the task is recruiting and it's on the schedule, you recruit. If it's operational systems work and it's on the schedule, you build systems. If your brain starts generating reasons why something else is more urgent, you recognize that as hot cognition attempting to override cold cognition. You don't engage with the reasoning. You execute the schedule. Over time, this creates a secondary benefit. Your dopamine system begins to recalibrate. When you consistently choose growth-necessary work over hedonically preferred work, and you see the tangible business results, your brain starts associating those previously uncomfortable tasks with serotonin-driven satisfaction. The activities don't necessarily become enjoyable, but they become reinforcing because they're linked to the deeper reward of progress. You're not eliminating the emotional dimension of work. You're rewiring which emotions get triggered by which activities. The schedule itself becomes a forcing function. Most entrepreneurs treat their calendar as a suggestion system. They put tasks on the schedule, then move them when they don't feel like doing them. This is hot cognition controlling the system. The correct approach is to treat the schedule as law. If it's on the calendar, it happens. No negotiation. No rescheduling unless there's an external emergency. This sounds rigid, but rigidity is the point. You're building a system that doesn't depend on your moment-to-moment motivation. The system runs regardless of how you feel. You've been operating under a false premise that your role as an entrepreneur is to find work that aligns with your natural preferences and abilities. That's not your role. Your role is to do whatever the business needs to grow, regardless of how it makes you feel. This doesn't mean ignoring your strengths. It means refusing to let your strengths determine your priorities. Strength is a resource. Priority is a strategic choice. The two are related but not identical. The mature operator understands that business growth and personal comfort exist in tension most of the time. Not always. There are periods where they align. But structurally, the work that drives growth is often the work that creates psychological friction. It's uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar, because it requires skills you haven't developed, because it doesn't trigger the dopamine hit you've become accustomed to. That discomfort isn't a signal that you're on the wrong path. It's a signal that you're doing something that matters. This requires redefining what productive means. You've been measuring productivity by how engaged and energized you feel during work. That's a dopamine-driven metric. The correct metric is, did this activity move the business toward its next milestone? If the answer is yes, it was productive, regardless of how it felt. If the answer is no, it wasn't productive, regardless of how good it felt in the moment. This shift in measurement changes everything. It allows you to see clearly which activities you've been prioritizing for hedonic reasons and which you've been avoiding despite their strategic necessity. The bifurcation of your mind into strategist and executor isn't a metaphor. It's a functional separation that must be maintained through deliberate practice. The strategist operates during designated planning sessions, weekly, sometimes daily, when you're calm and focused on long-term outcomes. The strategist looks at the business objectively, identifies growth bottlenecks, and assigns tasks accordingly. The executive operates during work blocks. The executive doesn't question, doesn't negotiate, doesn't optimize. The executive simply completes what the strategist assigned. This system works because it removes decision-making from the execution phase. Every moment you spend deciding what to work on is a moment where hot cognition can hijack the process. By eliminating in-the-moment choice, you eliminate the primary vector for hedonic prioritization. You're not white-knuckling your way through unpleasant work. You're following a system that was designed by the version of you that isn't emotionally compromised. Over time, as you accumulate evidence that this approach produces results, something shifts. The friction between your preferences and your priorities begins to dissolve. Not because the work becomes more enjoyable, but because the satisfaction of seeing your business grow becomes more reinforcing than the fleeting pleasure of doing work you like. You start to derive identity from being someone who executes what's necessary rather than someone who does what feels good. That identity shift is permanent. It changes how you evaluate opportunities, how you structure your days, how you measure success. This is the core Machiavellian insight. You don't wait until you feel like doing the right thing. You build systems that ensure the right thing gets done regardless of how you feel. The self is not a reliable guide. The system is. Your job isn't to become a person who naturally prefers growth-critical work. Your job is to become a person who does growth-critical work, regardless of preference. That's the difference between the entrepreneur who plateaus at a comfortable level of success and the one who builds something that scales beyond their personal capacity. Most entrepreneurs spend years trying to optimize their emotional state, trying to find the perfect morning routine or productivity hack that will make difficult work feel easy. That's a misallocation of effort. The work won't feel easy. It's not supposed to. The goal isn't to make it feel easy. The goal is to build a system that ensures it gets done anyway. Once you accept that, you stop wasting energy on emotional optimization and start investing it in systematic execution. You have a choice to make in the next 24 hours, and it will reveal whether you understood what you just read or whether you're still operating inside the old pattern. Tomorrow, before you begin work, you're going to set your strategy using the robotic clone framework. You're going to ask, if I had a version of myself that would execute anything without emotional resistance, what would I have that version do to grow the business? Write down 3 specific tasks. Not tasks you want to do. Tasks the business needs done. Then you're going to execute those tasks in order, without deviation, regardless of how you feel when it's time to start. You will not check email first. You will not warm up with something easier. You will not negotiate with yourself about whether now is the optimal time. You will execute the first task on the list until it's complete, then move to the second, then the third. This is the test. Not whether you understand the framework intellectually, but whether you can implement it when your brain is generating every reason why something else is more urgent. Here's what will happen. At some point during execution, you'll feel the pull toward a different task, something that feels more important, more interesting, more aligned with your current energy level. That pull is hedonic prioritization, attempting to reassert control. The moment you notice it, you label it. This is hot cognition trying to override my cold cognition strategy. Then you return to the assigned task. You don't fight the pull. You acknowledge it and continue anyway. If you complete all 3 tasks without deviation, you've demonstrated that you can separate strategy from execution identity. You've proven that you can let business necessity determine your actions rather than letting your actions be determined by in-the-moment preference. That single day becomes the template. You repeat it. You refine the strategy setting process. You strengthen the execution discipline. Over time, this becomes your default operating mode. If you don't complete the 3 tasks, if you get distracted, if you substitute something else, if you convince yourself that a different approach is better, then you're still inside the old pattern. You're still filtering through hedonism. And you need to ask yourself a direct question. Do you want to grow the business, or do you want to feel good while working? Because most of the time, you don't get both. The operators at the highest level chose growth years ago. They built the systems that ensured growth-critical work happened regardless of their preferences. That's why they're where they are. This isn't motivational rhetoric. This is a functional description of how behavior change occurs. You don't change by understanding new concepts. You change by implementing new systems and accumulating evidence that those systems produce results. The 24-hour challenge is the first implementation cycle. It's proof of concept. If you can execute it once, you can execute it repeatedly. If you can't execute it once, then nothing else matters. Theory without implementation is just intellectual entertainment. The entrepreneurs who win don't have better ideas. They don't have superior talent. They have better systems for ensuring that necessary work gets done, regardless of how it feels. That's the only advantage that compounds over time. Everything else, intelligence, creativity, passion, is just raw material. The system is what converts raw material into results. You now have the system. The only question is whether you'll use it. Tomorrow, set the strategy. Execute without negotiation. Report back to yourself at the end of the day on what happened and why. That's the beginning. The week after, you'll refine the process. You'll identify which tasks genuinely moved the business forward and which ones felt necessary but produced no results. You'll get better at distinguishing between business-first work and disguised hedonic work, the tasks that look strategic but are really just more comfortable versions of avoidance. This is an iterative process. You won't perfect it immediately, but if you commit to the 24-hour challenge and repeat it consistently, the system becomes automatic within 30 days.